Hi there, I'm Mark Fennell and welcome to India Now. This is a show all about India and its neighbours, countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh and the wider subcontinent. There are literally billions of stories that make up this extraordinary region, and over the next 6 weeks we're going to dive into the technological, the economic, the environmental and the cultural shifts happening right now. But tonight we're looking at education and why countries like Australia don't often recognise the qualifications of many Indian migrants, plus how to make a country laugh. Comedy in India.
I looked at him and I said, I don't hate waiting at airports because I remember waiting at railway stations.
And joining me on the panel is that guy, comedian Amit Tandon. He used to be an engineer with an MBA, decided that job security was overrated, and how he's making people laugh for a living. You've passed the magic 100 million mark on social media, and right now you are touring. Welcome to the very first episode of India Now.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks.
And alongside Amit, we have Dr. and Associate Professor Shanti Raman, who wanted to be a professional dancer but instead just gained a bunch of qualifications in the fields of paediatrics and public health since you arrived here at the age of 19. Welcome to India Now.
Thank you. Great to be here. So exciting.
All right, let's start with what's happening in India now. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi met with his counterparts at the Quad Summit in Tokyo earlier this week, where he said the security dialogue would ensure stability in the Indo-Pacific.
क्वाड इंडो-पैसिफिक क्षेत्र के लिए एक कंस्ट्रक्टिव एजेंडा लेकर चल रहा है। इससे क्वाड की छवि एक फोर्स फॉर गुड के रूप में और भी सुदृढ़ होती जाएगी।
Avani Dias is the ABC's South Asia correspondent and she joins us from New Delhi. Avani, how was the summit seen in India?
Mark, it's been really interesting in the last week or so to see how Indian politicians, diplomats, the media have interpreted this crucial Quad meeting between the leaders of Australia, India, the US and Japan. This is a bloc that has strengthened so significantly over the last 5 years. And this meeting was only the second time these leaders have actually met in person. But for Narendra Modi, this is a really crucial bloc. It is a way for India to be recognised on the world stage. And Modi's aims and his government's aim is to get India to that position of global superpower. But Mark, in the last couple of days, S. Jaishankar, who's the Indian Foreign Minister, has written an op-ed in a major newspaper here. And he has said the biggest issue for India has been overcoming the, quote, hesitations of history. And he's used that phrase before. And it means that India has been underestimated since British independence as a country that can be a world leader in this respect. And it's fair to say that this anti-China stance, that is what this Quad has developed on, that has been a really good thing for Modi in terms of foreign policy because it's a way to form these new relationships and actually get some global recognition.
Is there a sense of how Australia's new Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, is going down in India?
Yeah, there has, Mark, and it's been really significant because Anthony Albanese, in his victory speech when he won the Prime Ministership, he said that the Quad relationship was important to this new Labor government, and he jumped on a plane within 24 hours to Tokyo to that meeting. He had a bilateral meet-up with Modi, and Modi really rated the fact that he made the effort to actually come there and make that his first thing to do. But Mark, it's also been kind of funny because Anthony Albanese has been getting a lot of props here for the fact that apparently he went backpacking here in the 90s with his girlfriend. That is a usual trip that young Australians do, I guess, in some respects. But Albanese is getting a lot of brownie points for that trip.
I just want to see the pictures. All right, in other news across the region, protests continue in Sri Lanka too over the economic crisis.
Yeah, Mark, that has been the really big story here in South Asia over the last couple of months. I've been to Sri Lanka and there is a lot of dread, a lot of concern about this economic crisis that has cut off basic services, and it's been so devastating to see in the last couple of weeks. The country has hit rock bottom. There was no petrol. So just imagine that situation, not having the freedom to be able to go from A to B. But in the last couple of weeks, there have been a few interesting developments. These protests have continued. The protesters have seen a few wins. We've seen the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Mahinda Rajapaksa, resigning a few weeks ago. A new Prime Minister has taken over, Ranil Wickremesinghe. But there was a lot of hope that a foreign bailout would come. The World Bank has rejected Sri Lanka's requests for a bailout to bring back some of those services, which has brought a lot of concern among Sri Lankan people. But in the last week, India India has come to the rescue. It has sent over petrol, it's sent over milk and rice, kerosene, various supplies that are necessary for this country to keep functioning.
And of course, right across the region, there's been some incredible weather, haven't it?
Mark, that's been a really disconcerting thing to experience the last few months here in India. I mean, it's really early in the morning here and I'm already experiencing such hot weather because there's been a heat wave, record-breaking temperatures over the last couple of months. And then in the last week, we've seen the other extreme on the east of India as well as in Bangladesh. Floods which have displaced millions of people. We've seen dozens of people die in those floods being described as by people there as unprecedented. But climate change experts are saying this is yet another extreme weather event, the kind that they've been warning about, and it's something that the world should pay attention to, according to them.
And finally, changing up the tone, Avani, South Asian filmmakers have had quite a week in the Cannes Film Festival, I hear.
That's right, Mark. And, you know, it's been interesting covering that climate change story the last couple of months. There's been a lot of concern internationally, a lot of Australians really concerned about what's going on with the weather here in India. And that kind of interest has been reflected at the film festival. A documentary about birds which are falling from the sky because of these changing temperatures, because of the heat. It's a pretty apocalyptic image, right? And that has won the documentary award. It was made by two brothers. And then we've seen another film from Pakistan called Joyland, which also won an award, one of the highest awards at the film festival. And that story is about a young boy who falls in love with a transgender person and how the family kind of comes to terms with that issue. So it's really great to see that some of these stories, some of these really important cultural events are being recognised at one of the biggest film festivals in the world.
I mean, it is amazing, just given the size of the Indian film industry, that it hasn't won more awards over the decades of the Cannes Film Festival.
Absolutely. It's astounding to me. I don't want to take away from the fact that South Asians are thrilled about this. And in particular, I think the India and Pakistani venture that actually got the big gong, the uncertain regard one. So I think that's fabulous. But the fact that we produce so many films in India, such good quality as well as so much dross, that the fact is more people talk about what the actresses wore at Cannes, what all our Bollywood starlets wear, rather than what we produce. So I think there's a huge issue.
And how dare you say that there's dross? I can't sit next to you now. But I mean, for you though, is there a reason, do you think, that Indian films haven't been better represented at events like Cannes?
First of all, it doesn't really matter how much they're winning at Cannes, because I think, you know, we can't always measure our success on the basis of how well we've done on that platform. And second, if you look at what has won in Cannes, there are like 10 odd films that have won. Most of them are in what they call as a poverty porn genre. You know, that's what West wants to see. So when that comes out, we showcase that. They're like, okay, this is what we want to award. But there are a lot of other genres that have produced excellent movies, but not recognized. So I don't think it matters.
I mean, that's a good point, actually, Avani. I mean, does the Indian film industry, given its size and output, does it actually need to have successes at places like Cannes?
I don't think it does, because this is a country with more than 1 billion people, and now that I live here I get the Indian Netflix. There are so many amazing local films that do so well in this country, and they have just such a big audience. And when you just look at numbers, you just automatically get a huge audience, because this place is so interested in film, it's so interested in culture, and that's the audience that these Indian filmmakers are thinking about. It's not necessarily looking at things on the world stage. But I think what's interesting about the documentary winner, for example, at the Cannes Film Festival, is that these issues, there is a big need for especially young Indians to send out a message to the rest of the world about what's going on here in India.
All right, thank you so much, Anthony. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Imagine studying for years only to arrive in a country where all of your hard work is regarded as, well, largely invisible. It's an all too common experience, as Mehek Sikar tells us.
I call it Mr. Mundi. It's like Mundi is head in Hindi. So that's Mr. Mundi. He's been very good to me. He's traveled, I've been dating Mr. Mundi for the last 6 months now. I was not expecting to be a dentist here straight away as and when I landed, but I expected something better than what the opportunities that I had when I landed. On job, I was trained in preventive oncology from one of the most prestigious cancer institutes in Southeast Asia. As soon as I graduated, I did not want to get into a private practice. I wanted to do something for the community I was living in. And finally, I found the place I loved, Lifeline Express. So Lifeline Express is the world's first hospital train that goes to rural India to provide medical care to underprivileged people in India. And I was their first medical officer and the first female permanently on board. In 2018 is when I left Lifeline Express because I found the love of my life. So my husband's the second generation here. His family's been here for 35 years. And we got married and I moved here. That's my set of teeth, like different teeth for different activities. So I have some cavity teeth, some teeth that already have a lot of decay, and I just have to remove the decay. Our qualifications from back home are unfortunately not recognized. And it took me about 3-4 months to have my CV being circulated everywhere. Everybody in the family was trying, family, friends, Seek, Indeed, all of these websites. It didn't help because I was refused on the basis of being highly qualified for all the positions that I was applying for, or not having a local qualification or local experience. You won't have to do this. You just have to keep filling these little bottles. Thank you. Because they work at a very high speed. If you don't have water, they'll burn. It was like taking away my soul. I still get teary every time I have to think back of that moment wherein I had to remind myself of, you're not Dr. Mehak Sikka. I used to cry every other day, come back home and just be like, what do I do with my life? That's when I decided that enough, I've settled enough in Australia, and now I have to get back to requalifying. This is everything I used to practice for my practical exam. And endo, the root canal tooth, is $30 each. That's something that I use very sparingly. I don't use it too often. These are these ones in special packs, and they're $30 each. So it is so stressful. You know, you have your family who spends so much money for this exam. You know the cost of failing. You know, if I don't get through, another $4,500, another 6 months of my life, and the 12 hours on my dental chair, no social life. I just want to spread smiles. I just want to see people smiling.
So why are we telling you Mehak's story? Well, because it's the same for thousands of migrants who move to Australia every year, who've achieved education and expertise in their chosen field, but they then face having to requalify when they arrive, which of course takes time and it takes money. But change could be afoot. Earlier this year, a new free trade agreement was forged between Australia and India. As part of the agreement, the Australian government promised to revisit this vexed question of how tertiary education credentials gained in India are recognised in Australia. A task force is being established to deliver a framework for recognising degrees from India, and it's expected to deliver its report at the end of the year. But of course, for you, this happens all the time in the medical industry, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I hear that story that Mehak so beautifully told every day, perhaps every week. So I think it's about recognising not just education and expertise, it's about education, experience and expertise, and the particular types of experience that professionals in India might have that is so vastly different and perhaps very beneficial to populations in Australia. We've got to think about the big youth bulge that we have in India as a huge opportunity. There's no other country in the world with this kind of young population that's ready to take on the world. So I think that story is common. We need to acknowledge what we can do about that. We have a role in Australia to recognise qualifications, taken that component of experience and expertise, as well as education qualifications, and also look at the matching. And there's a huge mismatch between what people come with and where they end up. And this story, I mean, I can tell you from my own experience, my mother had an aged care support worker who was a qualified surgeon, gastrointestinal surgeon from her country, brilliant, got all the awards she could, and is still struggling to not pass her exams here, which she has done, but to actually get an internship. And the last thing I do want to say is, because health, I work in health and I'm really passionate about public health, a big issue for us is to think about the brain drain versus brain gain, because all those people who come here and work in Australia for 25 million people have come from a population of 1.3 billion people, many of them far more needy of health expertise. So I think we have to take that into account.
Amit, you travel the world, you perform in front of audiences everywhere. Is this a story you see playing out in other places as well?
Yeah, you'll see this happening in US, you'll see it happening in most of the countries, and I kind of agree with the policy that's there, except for probably the cost part. But I think you have to, when you come to a country, especially in a field like medical, for example, you have to re-educate yourself. You can't just say that I want equal, because every country, even if somebody is coming from Australia to settle down in India, the kind of medical situation that you would have seen could be vastly different, okay? The stakes are much higher. When you are a health worker, the stakes are much higher. You can't just, go to another country and tell them, trust me, I have done everything, right?
You can, you just might not be trustworthy.
Yeah. So, as, the Australian government also has, has certain obligations towards their citizens. They want to ensure that when somebody comes in, is a qualified enough doctor to handle a case in Australia. For that, they have to go through the examinations. They have to see whether they, they can take care of somebody who's, who has problems which are typically Australian or may have not been seen in India by people. Cost could be a challenge. Yes, that could, that's something that can be figured out, because you ultimately end up contributing a lot to the healthcare system of the country. So that's my take on it.
I'm interested to know how it's changed over the years. So you arrived in Australia in 1983, is that right? Is the situation facing young people coming to Australia from India better or worse than when you first arrived?
I think, it got better and then it got worse. The last couple of years, clearly with COVID, has been a major setback. When I came in 1983, you were still the odd brown person that was encountered in the hospital situation. Now, of course, the hospitals and health services are aflood with many of us. So certainly things have improved. I think there are gatekeepers here, as Amit very well identified. Our gatekeepers are the Australian Medical Council, but also we have the colleges, the colleges, Royal Australasian College of GPs, Royal Australasian College of Physicians, of which I'm a member, College of Surgeons, all of those things. And they are gatekeepers. So they really want to make sure that they keep their numbers, and the people who enter their chosen hallowed portals, they want to make sure that they keep a tight rein on those.
Amit, you're just about the most overqualified comedian on the planet. I mean, you went to an Indian Institute of Technology, you have an MBA. I'm guessing education was something really important growing up for you. But do they talk about it in terms of your qualifications being transportable around the world? Like when you went to the IIT, did they talk about, well, this will be useful if you want to move elsewhere in the world?
No, it's not talked about. So first, I did my graduation from a government engineering college in Punjab. Then I did my post-graduation from IIT Delhi. So I want to clarify that. With IITs, what happens is, because, we saw the graduates who are, I think, the sharpest minds, in India, when you see those people. I was there in the year 2000 to 2002. There were already a lot of global leaders that had emerged from the same institute. So we had, the Rajat Gupta of McKinsey, later on, whatever happened with him, was heading McKinsey globally and stuff like that. And they used to come in and talk. So there was never an issue of, whether I can perform on global stage. They always had their eyes there that this is just the stepping stone. We will move out or we'll do something larger. That's always there with them. So.
And then you became a comedian. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit. But I do just want to ask, as this task force I mentioned earlier is moving forward, what would a best case scenario look like for you for people like Mehak coming through? What should the future look like?
The future should look like, a much better match between qualifications, experience and expertise and population needs. When talking about health, this is as true for refugee populations that are coming across. I've attended a fantastic conference in Europe where they talked about how they're using refugee healthcare workers to look after their own populations. I mean, these are the sort of things we should be able to do a lot better. So I think the match that we can arrive with someone like Mehak is to acknowledge what she's worked with. I mean, not just the qualifications, but the fantastic role that she played in working with the most disadvantaged. And we can use that experience to match her to respond to the most disadvantaged in our population here in Australia. So I think that would be a good match, trying to make sure that what she brings to this country is actually received with some dignity and response.
Amit, what would you like to see change?
Change-wise, I kind of agree with what she said, because, the kind of problems Mehak, for example, had handled in India, if you map it accordingly and say, okay, if I have to use the term, poor people dental problems versus rich people dental problems,
Yes.
It's,
they would be different, yeah.
That's the term, right? Poor people, the problems are largely, they have, cavities, oral hygiene, those are the issues, whereas, when you go a little up, it's more about, can I design your smile? And, things like that. Those are the things. I got it designed, so.
And it shows. It's very nice.
So, yes, there she would be a, an easier fit that, you've handled these kind of cases, so you can be approved for this, not everything else. So these are the lines within which you can draw. And probably if you want to draw outside of it, then get yourself upskilled or get yourself, qualified here, go through the examination process. I think that's completely right.
All right, we will come back with more in just a second.
Here's a few facts about Narendra Modi, aka Modi Ji Namo, India's main man. You've probably already seen him around the interwebs since he's the second most followed politician on Twitter, muscled out only by Barack Obama. That's a long way from his start as the son of a chaiwala in Gujarat. He's been married since he was 18, but when his wife Jashodaben Modi moved in with his parents, he left, and he never acknowledged the marriage until he was legally made to before the 2014 election. He's the country's 14th Prime Minister, but actually the first to be born in independent India.
Bharat Mata Ki!
A radical in his student days, he was a leader of the RSS, a Hindu nationalist outfit. And when Indira Gandhi's government cracked down on opponents in the 70s, he kept organizing demonstrations while in hiding.
20 साल से नरेंद्र मोदी जी ने एक भी छुट्टी नहीं ली है 20 साल तक अहर्निश काम.
And legend tells it he works 18 hours a day.
So Amit, here's a little bit more of you on stage talking about your career change we alluded to earlier.
मैं 7 करियर बदल चुका हूँ 22 साल के टेन्योर में अपने. I've been into petrochemical consulting. I've been in satellite multicasting. मैं engineering वगैरह करी हूँ, MBA करी हूँ. Data analytics करा हुआ है मैंने. I have run an HR consulting firm. I have run a restaurant, and now I am doing comedy. 6-7 चीजें change कर चुका हूँ. So even for my kids, I am not an inspiration. I am a consolation.
My kids think that way about me too, if it's worth anything. So, I mean, out of all of those different careers that you mentioned, how is it that you actually ended up doing comedy?
So comedy was not supposed to be a career for me. I was running an HR consulting firm. We were doing very well. We grew from 2 people to 50 within 4 to 5 years. And this started more as a hobby, because open mics were just starting in India. So there was no scene of live comedy earlier. In 2009, it was just starting off, and I started doing it just, that you get out of your office and, you pursue a hobby. That's how it started. But somehow people liked what I was doing. I started, and the scene was exploding. People offered some money to do it. And I was like, okay, why not? And I think it was around 2011-12 when, I got my first corporate show. And, we were flown down to Mumbai for a show. And they had put us up in a 5-star hotel. A big car came to pick us up. And, I performed for 15 minutes, and came back to my room. The money had come in advance. I couldn't sleep the entire night. Like, oh my God, I've been in my business for 7 years. There's a 3-month payment follow-up cycle. Okay, I have to book my own flights. I'll stay at the cheapest hotels, cheapest flights, cheapest taxis. And here it's the opposite. The client is paying for everything. They pay me in advance. Why did I not look at this as a business? So that's when I started pursuing it, and I made my portfolio. I started sending out to event managers for corporate shows, and then I started releasing my videos on social media. After that, it went viral. 2017 was fantastic. I did UK, I did Australia tour, then US. I was supposed to do 6 shows, but it kept on getting sold out. I ended up doing 21 shows in US. Instead of 6, and then came back in 6 months and did another 29 there. So that's when I decided that, okay, so now it's probably the time to, close down the business, because I was making way more money from comedy than I was making from my business.
I'm sorry, I just love that in all of the years I've been talking to comedians, this is the first time anyone's ever said, I picked a career in comedy because the invoicing was easier and better. That's the first time I've ever heard that.
Oh, money is important. See, the thing is, I already had kids, I already had a family when I started comedy. So I was very clear that I can't, tell my family to bring down their quality of life because I want to pursue my passion. I can't tell my kids that, you have to now go to a cheaper school because daddy wants to do comedy.
Yeah, I could see why that would be an awkward conversation.
Yeah, there's a certain commitment with which, I got, my wife got married to an engineer MBA and not a comedian.
I feel like I should be throwing to your wife for like a right of reply to this.
Oh, she's funnier than me.
Okay. I'm just going to defer to the doctor for 1 second. Is comedy a real job?
Oh, let me just say, I've always thought that comedians are the brightest, most intelligent, the sharpest minds on the planet. It takes a lot of courage to be a comedian. So I've had a lot of respect for comedians. If you ask my parents, is comedy a reasonable job, they would obviously say no. I think many Indians of my generation would not think comedy is a reasonable profession. When I was growing up in India, there were only 2 paths to take. You either go to engineering or doctoring, medical doctoring, nothing else. Now I think there's a 3rd path, which is IT. It hasn't gone much beyond that. So I think that change is in the air. I think comedy is definitely an obvious choice for the smartest minds.
Hello, I'm Pawan Luthra, and today I want to tell you the story about the Sone ki Chidiya. It means golden bird and refers to the rich lands of the subcontinent before colonization.
This was a land that was rich in resources. It was a very fertile land. It was a region that had, for the longest time, had an open exchange with the rest of the world.
Positioned on ancient trade routes like the Silk Road, visitors would come from far-off places to find a land of bright colors, exotic spices, aromas, textiles, and silks, and trade for luxury goods.
Historical facts suggest that India was a country with wealth. It was a country that was very developed, very advanced compared to any civilization either in Asia or in Europe.
By some estimates, the economy was thought to be larger than all of Western Europe's combined.
Everyone wanted to trade with it. Everyone wanted to send their diplomats there, their state emissaries there.
This mythology of the golden bird doesn't mean everything was perfect.
Only the super rich had money, whereas the rest had very little. And in fact, there was a very large number of urban poor or rural poor. So in a sense, we are dealing with a paradox, the image of a wealthy country, which indeed was in a certain sense, in terms of its share of world's trade and wealth and money. But at the same time, it was also a poor country.
But it tells part of a past that includes rich architecture, beautiful art, deep philosophy, and more.
There was vibrant creative energy in terms of literature, architecture, arts, culture, and trade thrived. It was overall a rather stable and prosperous period.
But it didn't last.
The Mughal Empire began to decline in the first half of the 18th century.
And British influence expanded.
India's share of the world economy when Britain arrived on its shores was 23%. By the time the British left, it was down to below 4%.
Economically, the impact of colonization was absolutely devastating.
It was a one-way trade. Export without return, national wealth declined, and its share of world's resources declined simultaneously.
There was political, social, cultural impact which was equally devastating. The subcontinent experienced a loss of skill, loss of creativity, loss of identity.
75 years since independence, the world is different. The country today has a new identity, a modern image, one it has built over time, but with echoes of a golden past.
And that is all we have time for on the show tonight. Huge thank you to Amit Tandon and Shanti Raman. Thanks for joining me on the show.
Thank you, Mark. It was a pleasure.